This is The Right Approach. I'm JW Judge, and with me is my co-host Barbara Hinsky. This is a podcast for lighter... Man, that's twice in a row. Twice in a row this week that I've messed up the introduction and had to start over. All right. This is The Right Approach. I'm JW Judge, and with me is my co-host Barbara Hinsky. This is a podcast for writers to learn more about the craft and business of writing as we explore a new topic every week. Our guest this week is Lynne Golodner, and she is an author of 9 books, 6 nonfiction books, 2 poetry collections, and as of September of 23, a novel. Lynne, thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm thrilled to be here.
All right. So, as someone who has done some career pivots in my life, I know that you are an entrepreneur, that you have had career pivots in your past, and that writing has intersected with all of that. So that's where I'd like to start with just a little bit about you and your journey in writing and business.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, it's funny because when I was in college, I don't know where I got this idea, but I thought I could be one of 3 careers, business, law, or medicine. And yet I was writing all the time. I worked for the Michigan Daily at the University of Michigan. I freelanced for the Ann Arbor News. I was always like writing things on the side. And I don't know why it didn't occur to me until, I don't know, sophomore or junior year. Hold on, there are jobs in writing. So I could do what I love. And but of course I still thought of it in terms of how can I find a job doing this skill. And so I went for journalism. 3 weeks after graduation, landed a job in New York City, and I was working for a trade newspaper and freelancing and doing all the things. But I always thought that the creative writing would be on the side. I just didn't. It didn't occur to me that I could say I'm going to be an author, and let's just make this happen. And so I did it on the side. The first 8 books were on the side to whatever I was employed for. And I didn't have expectations that I'd make money from it or have a ton of readers, or, it was just sort of like, oh, someone chose my words and yay, I get a book with my name on it. So that was sort of the foundation from my perspective on writing and career. And so I had 15 years as a journalist in New York, Washington, and then back in Detroit, my hometown, and was sort of entrepreneurial about it. 10 of those 15 years, I was freelance. I made way more money when I went out on my own and started a business and everything. And I did my MFA in creative writing. I my my thesis was a poetry manuscript, and it was published as a book in time for graduation, which was so cool. But that also enabled me to teach writing at the college level, so I could complement my journalism with teaching classes, which I love. And after about 15 years, a lot of things in my life were changing. The economy was changing. That's when there was the economic downturn, and I was like, okay, well, what can I do? A lot of magazines were closing up. A lot of freelancers were losing their regular gigs. And so I created a business, and I thought, well, here are my skills. How can I get people to pay me to use them? And so I really created this storytelling approach to marketing and public relations. And it was when social media was getting popular and businesses were like, how do we communicate with our customers? And so I developed this approach really based on my journalism experience and my ease working with people in the media sector. And I became a bridge between companies and nonprofits and the media. And I loved it. And all the while I was writing books and essays and whatever. And about 5 years ago, call it a midlife crisis if you want, I was like, well, I say I'm a writer, but am I? Like, when am I going to put it as my priority, put it front and center? And so I really set about doing another pivot and trying to shrink my business so that I could put my writing front and center. So it's every morning, it's what I do. That time is sacred. I don't book any client meetings or anything during that time. And my goal was to write a book a year and just keep up that pace, which I'm on
Mm-hmm.
track to do at this point. And so the pivots were first out of necessity, but then out of passion, and just like, you get one life and I really want to be writing all the time. So how can I do it and still support my family? And that's what necessitated this last pivot.
I I love hearing that you prioritize your writing time because in my experience, if you don't, no one else will. Your family will think, oh, you're writing. Now's a good time to go in and disturb mom or my wife. And, my husband does not understand the stink eye. He is immune to the stink eye. So you really do just have to wall it away. Your book a year is that, I know you've written poetry and nonfiction and a novel. Are you writing more novels, and what's your genre? Tell us about
Yeah.
you,
So,
about what you're
um,
doing.
yeah. So my goal is a novel a year. I have a second novel coming out in August of this year, which I'm really excited about. Just met with the cover designers this week, and the editor is getting me final edits, hopefully by tomorrow. Um, and so, yes, I'm just starting to plan my next novel, which is going to be a second book in the Woman of Valor series, which is the book that came out last year. The book coming out this year is not related, but it's just a story I wanted to write. I may at some point put out a collection of my essays because I do balance my fiction writing with creative nonfiction essays, and a lot of them get published, and so I thought I might put a collection together at some point, just to have it out there. But my real focus now is telling great fictional stories, and I made a decision when I was crafting my author brand in the past, few years,
Mhm.
that one of the themes that runs through all of my writing for the past however many decades is that, I'm very strong in my Jewish identity, and a lot of the topics I write about have to do with that, being Jewish in
Mhm.
a Gentile world. And I write about a lot of other things too, but this sense of identity and belonging is really important in my writing. So I write emotional novels with compelling Jewish characters. They're not all Jewish. They're not
Mhm.
all religious. Woman of Valor is a pretty religious story, but lots of non-Jewish people have loved the book and found it
Mhm.
fascinating to get a window into the Orthodox world. Um, so that's sort of a theme that runs through all of my writing going forward because I really wanted a consistent brand to carry it through.
So I mentioned this off air that I am a lawyer and I'm part of an online community with a bunch of lawyers all over the country. And in our Slack group, we have a channel for parents. And one of the lawyers who's really active in there is Jewish, and they're practicing. And there are so many times when, being non-Jewish, we're talking about like holidays that are on the Christian holiday calendar, things
Yeah.
that to me are just, I have never considered. I'm from Texas. I live in Alabama. We don't have big Jewish populations of like,
Yeah.
the difference in religious observation and the calendar and how that affects people who aren't part of, the Christian culture. And, it's been such a good experience for me to have those interactions and be like, hey, dummy, sometimes you need to pay attention to, how things are affecting other people.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's funny. I've been like all different kinds of Jewish in my life. I was raised pretty secular, and I spent 10 years in the Orthodox world, and I'm somewhere in the middle now. I say I'm just Jewish. I like take and reject from all denominations.
Yeah.
But it's so much about my identity, heritage, ancestry, like the foods, just different things that are like my grandparents and my great grandparents and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And but it is interesting because I think for me, like I grew up in a pretty Jewish area, but we still are never the majority. I mean, unless you're in Israel,
Mhm.
and then it's the majority.
Yeah.
But here, elsewhere in the world, it's not. And so there's it's just interesting to see the world through that lens of being a minority, and yet a minority that people don't see as a minority, because
Mhm.
somebody could look at me and be like, oh, you're just normal white woman. And so it is interesting to be in a different mode. I think it's funny. One of my daughters said to me, "Are you pretty committed to this brand? Because like you might get more readers if you didn't just write about Jewish characters." And I said, "You might be right, but I am pretty committed to it, and
Mhm.
it's for a couple of reasons. One, because I just want to see strong Jewish characters in books. I
Mhm.
just do. Um, I also want other people to see that and to know. Like, I love reading books about, characters from India or, African Americans. Like I just start to learn about their world. And I think that's really important. It's a way that we can bridge gaps in our communities and things like that. But also, I feel like when you have a niche and you're writing in that niche pretty consistently, you have a better chance at marketing because
Yes.
you're specializing, and that's true for any
Hmm.
business. And so, like for my book tour for Woman of Valor, which has just started, wherever I go, I reach out to the Jewish communities, and they're so excited to host me for a book club or a talk or a writer's workshop or something. I also speak at universities. I speak to general audiences, but wherever I go, there's going to be a Jewish community that I can go and talk to 20 people, and it's great. So I think that's a really strong decision on multiple counts, and I think any writer would be wise to think about like what is your niche and how can you use
Hmm.
that both to deepen your identity as a writer, but in your marketing it just helps you to market in a more focused way.
Tell us about your nonfiction. Is your nonfiction also, I don't know your nonfiction titles. Is
Yeah.
it focused on your niche or is it just a whole mishmash of things?
So of the 6 books, quite a few of them are sort of like custom books that somebody hired me to write for them.
Okay.
So
Okay.
that isn't, but like
Yeah.
my most recent one was called The Flavors of Faith, Holy Breads, and it's about how every faith, every community has a bread, maybe more than one, and there's recipes, there's
Interesting.
stories, and but it's the whole premise is like, wait, if we're all breaking bread in some kind of way, don't we have that in common? Isn't that a way that we could come together and say, here are some similarities? And everybody's favorite
Love that.
chapter in that book is when I go to this mosque in Dearborn, Michigan, which is the highest concentration of Arab Americans in the country, and
Mhm.
it's a huge mosque. And there, the women have been baking these breads twice a week, and they're not religious; they're just cultural, and they're delicious. And they sell them twice a week, and the sales from the bread have supported this mosque to the tune of $250,000 a year for like
Wow.
50 years.
Wow.
So I'm writing about, wow, there's so many similar words in Arabic to Hebrew. And
Mhm.
these women are trying to feed me like my mother and grandmother. And so, like, just being there was an experience of finding common ground for me. And so people love that chapter because it's like, here's a
Marketing.
Jew in a mosque and feeling at home, finding common ground. So a lot of, I mean, my nonfiction now, it's not all Jewish, but it's all about belonging in the world, connecting to the world, things like that.
Mhm.
We talked some about marketing, and early on in the conversation, you talked about how you used story driven marketing. And that is something that I read a lot of book about. I One of my favorite business authors is Donald Miller, and he has a book called well, now I'm totally escaping something about story brand. I'm totally escaping the name. But when I read that book and he talked about using a story approach to marketing, and used a lot of examples from books and movies and popular culture about characters and how to do that, it really changed what I was doing as a lawyer in branding and marketing myself, and really had a significant effect on me. So I would like you to talk a little bit about using story as an
Yeah.
approach to marketing, and also how you have incorporated that into, and I think we've probably talked about it some, but into your marketing yourself as a writer and an author.
Yeah, yeah. So I'd love to. So and I do still have a couple marketing clients, but I mostly help authors with their branding and their marketing strategy. But all the different clients I've had over the years, we start with really developing their story and figuring out like how is what you do different from anybody else in your industry, and that has a both personal and professional angle to it. So um, like why do you do what you do? How did your company come to be? Um, in your market, how is that unique versus in another place? Like getting really specific and detailed, which writers know pretty well, is really helpful for marketing. So I have this formula when I teach marketing, which is that storytelling plus relationships plus higher purpose equals brand growth.
Mm.
And the higher purpose actually comes first because it's the why. It's why are you doing this? Why are you in this business, or why are you writing books, or whatever it is? And then the story, I mean, I spend months with clients to really develop a story, thinking so carefully about the words they're using, developing what I call a narrative foundation so that um, everybody at the place can use the same words and concepts and ideas. And you're saying the same things in all your marketing channels. So there's consistency, there's repetition, all that. And then the relationship part is who needs to hear this. So, I think that marketing has changed a lot in the last 20 years, at least, and certainly since I've been doing it, that it's not about, I'm selling this, so you buy it because I want you to buy it. That's not enough. Like, it has to have mutual benefit. And clients have to think about, what's in it for the people out there. Like, yeah, I want you to buy my book because that's a book sale, and great, I want to sell more books, but what's in it for you? And how do I recognize that mutual benefit, that we're both getting something out of this relationship? And so much of marketing is building relationships and nurturing them over time, not just when you want to sell something, but building a long-term connection. So, sure, I'd love it if you guys would buy Woman of Valor, but I also would really like it if we could have a conversation about it and then keep talking, and I could keep seeing you over time. Maybe you'll buy future books, and then maybe we can have meaningful conversations and I can do something that benefits you and vice versa. And that's just so much more meaningful and satisfying for all of us. And it's how businesses succeed, because repeat business is far easier and more sustaining than pulling someone new in the door all the time. So, like, I spoke recently to a book club here in the Detroit area, and I was sitting at a restaurant with these women, had the best time, and we were just talking about the book, and and they were asking questions about, like, what are you writing next? And you're going to write another book in the series. That's cool, whatever. And, but I was asking about them, trying to get to know them. And I would love to go back to them at some point, whether it's with a new book or just to sort of touch base, because it's about this human connection. And that's really what we're trying to do. Yes, we need to earn money, but more than that, we want to make our mark. And that we need to see that big picture.
What is your promotional portfolio? Do you have a newsletter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok? What are you doing to
Yeah,
let
so I
people
do a lot of
find you?
I do a lot of things. So, of course, my website, lynnegolodner.com, but I'm on social media. I don't do TikTok. I don't know. I've done some videos, reels on Instagram and Facebook, and I love other people's. I always feel like this is so silly, but people love the reels I do, but I just think they're hilarious. So I'm on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter. I have a weekly Substack called the Rebel Author Newsletter, and it's all about writing and publishing. I send out an occasional newsletter to, like, another list. Um, yeah, that's pretty much it. But my big thing for book marketing is in-person events and also Zoom. I mean, I'll do some Zoom events too, but I like meeting people. I like talking and having, deep conversations. And so I went to Hawaii last month, and my son was studying there, and so of course I had to visit in January.
Mhm.
And but because I was going, I reached out to the university, and I reached out to
Mhm.
the Jewish community and to others, and I ended up with 3 speaking engagements and
That's
sold a
great.
bunch of books and made
Yeah,
new friends. Like, how cool is
yeah,
that? So
yeah.
yeah, that's pretty much how I market.
And are you trad or indie published?
So my 8 previous books were all traditionally published. And when I started to think about how to put Women of Valor in the world, I actually got a contract from a small publisher, and a few agents were interested. But I decided to do it on my own. I started a press called Scotia Road Books, and it's now a hybrid press for women over 40 with strong voices. So I'm helping other women get their books out there. But the reason I did it was because I have a really aggressive time frame. I want a book a year, and I
Yeah,
don't want to
yeah,
wait for other people to get around to it. I understand the
right.
industry. I also don't want somebody to tell me to water down the Jewishness in the books.
Yeah.
And for better or for worse, that might hurt me or it might help me. I don't know, but that's what I want to write. And so I have a network of editors, graphic designers, all of that I work with.
Mhm.
to make sure that, I mean, the writing is got to be top quality in my mind.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm not going to just whip something out and put it in the world. Like I put a lot of pain into that. So
Yeah.
that's how I'm publishing for now.
Yeah. Kudos to you. I think you're doing it all right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so Barb and I are both independently published as well. My first book was traditionally published. After that, I decided I wanted to control everything,
Yeah.
and I was willing to put the work and the effort in that was required to learn all of the other aspects of the
Yeah.
business and put a good product into the world.
Yeah.
And so I completely resonate with what you were saying there about your business decision behind doing it the way you are, and I think that's great.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
want to, if you don't mind, I'd love to interject and share a little story. So a really good friend of mine, Elizabeth Gowing, she's a great writer. If anybody wants to check her out, she's British and she lives in Kosovo, and she has her own press. She has two books that were traditionally published in the UK and four or five through her press. So I was doing my research before Woman of Valor, and I was asking people, what are the pros and cons? And Elizabeth said to me, "Do you want to sell a lot of books or do you want to make a lot of money?" And I said, "Can't I do both?"
Mhm.
She's like, "I don't think so." And I'm like, "Okay, well, tell me why." And so anyway, she went through the whole thing about how, like, when she had her UK publishers, she had far more reach because it was in all the stores and whatever, but she made 10% on each sale.
Mhm.
But then when she publishes a book through her own press, it may not go as widely as it would have otherwise, but she keeps it all.
Yeah.
And and I get that. And so I said to her, "I hear you and I love it. And I'm going to try to prove you wrong because I think I can do both. And we'll see. I'm very new in this journey, but I do want to sell a lot of books and I want to make a lot of money. And so that's the goal." So I do think it's the kind of thing, if you're an entrepreneur, you know, the sky's the limit. And all my friends
Yeah.
that are traditionally published now, they're putting a lot of their own money into their marketing because
Yeah.
the publishers are not doing it. So, I mean, I'm a marketer, I can do that. So, the jury's still out, but I think in a few years, if we talk again, I will let you know that I achieved the goals. That's what I'm going to say. I'm hoping that it's true.
I have no doubt, no doubt that you will. And for my trad published friends who are now trying to market it, they get such a small slice of the profits that they really don't have money to put into Facebook and Amazon ads.
For sure.
So you're just in a corner. And I really resonate with I don't want, just like you don't want somebody to tell you tone down the Jewishness.
Yeah.
I wrote a murder mystery where the protagonist um, had a speech impediment, and people looked at her like she was stupid, but she was brilliant.
Yeah.
And her own brilliance and her own hobbies lead her to a very dramatic way she saves herself.
Okay.
So, an Amazon imprint wanted to buy the book, but they said, "You've got to take away her disability." And she doesn't save herself. Her cop boyfriend comes in and saves her. And I'm like,
No.
what century are we in?
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
I said no. And my friends are like, "Oh, you turned down an Amazon deal?" Well, yeah. And I'm glad I did. And has that book done real well? No. But I haven't spent much time trying to market it either. And I may do that. But I have absolutely no doubt that you're going to do both and you're going to be very successful.
Thank you. My next book, which is called Cave of Secrets, has four protagonists, and one of them is a gay man who was Orthodox in Judaism as
Mhm.
a kid, and he leaves that community so he can be out and raise his
Mhm.
daughter without, the stigma in his community. And so I actually sent the manuscript to a sensitivity reader because I'm not a gay man, and so I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure I was representing him appropriately. And it was actually a woman that I sent it to who is a lesbian who came from a fundamentalist Christian background. And so
Mhm.
she had to come out in the same way that this character had to come out at the same time, same decade. And the character lives in Ann Arbor, and this writer lives in Ann Arbor. So I said, I understand it's not exactly the same, but the same elements there are there. And she was so helpful. And I did that because I want to make sure that I don't see any blind spots, that
Yeah.
I can take care of that. So as an indie author, it doesn't mean that I'm going to make mistakes. I still am
Right.
going to think about those things, but I'm not afraid to include them in the book because it's part of life. It's real.
Yeah.
I think that's really, a smart and necessary
Yes.
approach to a topic like that on a much more um, less important level. In my fifth novel that's coming out in April, Watch Party, I had like jujitsu, which I don't practice, takes a small role in some events of the book. And also, it's written from a the book is from a woman's perspective. I am not a woman, and I don't practice jujitsu.
Yeah.
So I sent it to I Barb read it, a couple of other women read it, to make sure that every everything is it doesn't come across as a dude writing a woman.
Yeah.
Um,
Right, right.
and also, I had somebody read it who, for years, has practiced jujitsu, and he sent me some notes back of like, okay, I understand what you're trying to say, but here's how we would say it, and here's what we would do instead of, like the YouTube video that I watched and tried to describe what I was seeing. Like, here's what you would want to do differently, and we had a conversation and made those changes. So, I think it's really important that you know if you're traditionally published, probably the publisher is going to have folks looking for those things. But if you're indie published, you have to take it upon yourself um, to put it in front of people who can tell you if you're wrong.
Yeah. I have a friend who's incredibly talented, traditionally published, and she wrote a book where the main character, I think she's in her 40s, and this author's in her late 50s, and the main character has teenage kids, and so the editor at this publisher was like 30 years old and said, I think that your protagonist should be like, you know, 30, 28, something like that. And so my friend said, well, but they can't have teen kids then. This totally changes the story because they're important secondary characters. But she wanted to please a publisher, so she rewrote the whole thing. And then the editor came back to her and said, I think you were right. The character
Mhm.
needs to be in her 40s. And I was angry on her behalf. She was so chill about it. She just wanted to, have a good experience with this publisher. But I was like, are you kidding? Like your gut told you what was right,
Yeah.
and it ended up being right, and yet you had to jump through hoops
Mm-hmm.
because they hold the power. And it's like sometimes that might be true, but a lot of times it's not. It's just preference. And
Yeah.
so I think there's a real power in being able to publish however you want these days.
Yeah. And I also think, especially with maybe a small press or whatever, I don't know if you really can rely on the editorial staff at a traditional publisher to say we need a sensitivity reader. I mean, it's all dollars and cents.
Yeah.
It's all dollars and cents. So you are going to be your own worst critic and best advocate for getting it right.
Yeah. And that's true with marketing. No one's going to love your book more than you.
Yeah.
And so, as much as writers don't want to do the marketing, yeah, it's
Yeah.
a lot of work. It never ends. You're always doing it, but
Yeah.
you're the one who's going to fight for that book to get in that library or that bookstore or, be at that
Mhm.
event way more than anybody that you hire. And so I think authors really need to embrace that idea that marketing is something that you're going to have to do however you publish. And so I always teach people find what's going to be fun about it for you because it can be fun. And if something, look, if you don't want to do videos, don't do videos. Fine. Like if you want to go in person and speak to Jewish communities, just do that, but do it. Just figure out what's going to be fun and
Yeah.
make it happen.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I learned. So much of so much of what I've learned about marketing and branding for my law practice is carried over into what I try to do for writing as well. Because, and I don't know if I've talked about this on here before, but the partner that I was hired to work for in 2012, he was gregarious and outgoing and extroverted and loved going to conferences and talking to all the people that he knows for 25 years. And I could do those things, but they are not me. I'm an introvert and a homebody, and I will sit at home and read a book or whatever, much preferably to doing all of those things. And I can do them and have to do them, and it's fine. But then I need to recharge my batteries afterwards. But what I
Mhm.
learned over, 4 years or so is I need to find the kind of marketing that is sustainable for me. And for me, that was writing. And so I started writing a lot of articles for, law practice books and magazines and that sort of thing, because that's what I could do over the long haul, over a career that was sustainable for me and effective for me and helped me establish my expertise and that sort of thing. And that is carried over into writing of I don't have time to go do in-person events because I have a young family and I have a law practice, and writing is what I do on the side. And so I can't go do all those things. But what I can do is set aside some time for hosting a podcast, which I enjoy and gives me an opportunity to build relationships with a small community of authors and meet new people. And maybe this is the only time I talk to some of those people and we don't interact again, but there have been plenty of others who have become relationships. I mean, that's how Barb and I met, is I reached out to
Mhm.
her about
Yeah.
being on my law podcast that I had. And, here we are years later.
Yeah.
And so, I think what you said there about finding what works for you and what's
Mhm.
sustainable as far as what your interests and your ability to do for marketing your work is super important.
Yeah, and I love what you just said too, like knowing yourself and what is good, what feels good and what doesn't. Like I'm not, I am social on a one-on-one level, but I'm not like, my husband knows if we go to a party, I get 1 hour and then I have to go home and put on my sweatpants, but he's still just
Yes.
making the rounds of the room, you know?
Yeah.
But we have 4 kids and my kids have always been my priority. My youngest is a senior in high school. So this year when I do book tour events, it's around his school schedule, so I don't miss anything. So he got to go to Hawaii with me, and he's coming to California next week for book tour events because he has a break from school. But then when he graduates, I feel like then the sky's the limit. I can go and do and whatever. Um, but I think that's important to mention to your listeners because like I've always been writing, but I didn't really take my writing career seriously until midlife when my kids were nearly grown. And I still didn't put it as the top priority until, now when my son is graduating and all the other kids are already out. Um, for that reason, because my family was my top priority and I didn't want to be away from them too much. And so, it's never too late to do this. There's so many
Right.
writers I know who start in their 40s, 50s, 60s,
Mhm.
and they still have such success. And
Yeah.
it's always, you can always enter.
Yeah. I mean, I published my first book at the age of 58. I'm 71 now. And, I'm going to be publishing my 23rd book in April, and I have 2 screen adaptations on the Hallmark Channel.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's absolutely doable at any stage. And I think you're right. You don't have to, nobody has to do everything,
Right.
but everybody needs to do something to
Yep.
market their work. So just find what gives you joy and don't torture yourself and think, oh, I'm going to have to become a TikTok influencer if you just hate the platform. No, of course you don't. Do what gives you joy.
Well, if it makes anybody feel better, I mean, lots of people have had, some success on TikTok, but most of TikTok's success with books is backlists. And so, books that have been out for years are finding a revival because of TikTok.
Yeah.
And so, what that tells me is I better work on having a backlist. And so, novel after novel, just like you, Barbara, just like
Yeah.
you, JW, like just, the more books you have out there, the more money you're going to make, the more books will sell. It builds
Yeah.
on itself. So
Yeah.
the focus should be on writing great books.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
think to add to that, and this is going to go back to earlier in the conversation, the work you're putting in building relationships with readers, they're
Mhm.
not they're not invested for 8 hours into a book. They're now invested in you because they care about you, the person.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And, you know, there is an adage that all you need is 1,000 true fans. And it's not that you can survive on those 1,000 fans,
Mhm.
it's that they are going to help, they are your advocates. And
Yeah.
so the people who are invested in you and are reading your works, they're not just going to read the one, they're going to read everything because they know you,
Right.
and they're going to help you put that out into the world and, cultivate other readers. So I just think that's a really smart approach. And that this whole conversation has just been so uplifting and
Yeah.
encouraging. And I don't think we get enough of that in
Yes.
the news or anywhere else. And so I've just really enjoyed like the positive nature of this conversation. So
Yeah.
before we wrap it up, I know you mentioned your website, but I'd like you to do it again and make sure to mention where people can find you and the work that you're doing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And your books. Yeah.
Great. So Woman of Valor is available wherever books are sold. And you can find me at lynnegolodner.com. I have a weekly Substack. It's the Rebel Author newsletter. I'd love to have you guys there. I do book giveaways and live coaching calls for paid subscribers, but I make it free to everybody, so you can read that. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook the most. I'm on LinkedIn and Twitter as well, but I'd love to be followed on any of those. And you know what? You can find me, and I would love to hear from you. So I love when people get in touch and say, I heard you on this podcast, and let's have a conversation, and let's have that conversation.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Mm.